Hello and welcome to Africa Here and Now, the conversation you've always wanted to have about the continent. I'm Martine Dennis. Today we ask, who is Botswana's new president, DUMA BOKO? Sudan's war is creating the world's largest modern-day famine. What are the prospects for peace? What do Nigerians make of KEMI BADENOCH, the new leader of Britain's Tory party? Plus, we look back at the rumble in the jungle. Right, let's bring in Patrick Smith, editor of Africa Confidential, and Donu Kogbara, the writer and broadcaster, who's not in her usual Abuja. Welcome back to London, Donu.
Hi.
Right, let's start in Botswana. Adam MFUNDISI is a public policy analyst at the University of Botswana. Adam, thank you for talking to us. What are some of the key facts that we should know about the president-elect?
Okay, one thing that I can say is that he's an advocate of the High Court and the Court of Appeal in the Republic of Botswana. He has university teaching experience. He taught at the University of Botswana for some time before he opted for private practice. And he has been leading a political party called Botswana National Front for more than 2 decades. And he has also assumed since 2012 the leadership of the Umbrella for Democratic Change, the party that won.
All right, so we know that he's a Harvard-trained human rights lawyer. We know that he's forged this coalition. He's forged this coalition between a variety of opposition parties, which has been a major achievement, hasn't it? What are the challenges that this coalition, the Umbrella for Democratic Change, what are the challenges that they face?
There are numerous challenges, hurdles, obstacles that the Umbrella for Democratic Change is going to face. Botswana, for the last 5 years, has gone through economic challenges, social problems, political challenges. But the main problem as he assumes office is the issue of the economy. The economy of Botswana is not in a stable position. We are in an undeclared recession. Government revenue is not coming as we have expected, or as the government has relied extensively on the diamond revenue. Our diamonds are not being sold at a rate that could sustain our economic challenges, etc. So the main issue is the economy, which in part has been caused by rampant corruption and maladministration, particularly in the last 5 years during the presidency of Masisi, our outgoing president. And this rampant corruption has exacerbated issues of unemployment. We have a high rate of unemployment, which from my point of view, is about 40%, affecting mostly the youth, which is educated, but unemployed with degrees, bachelor's, master's degrees, some with PhDs and what have you, unable to find a job. In addition, we have a social problem. Poverty has deepened. Most of our people in the rural and urban areas are poor, and they continue to be impoverished in spite of government commitment to providing quality basic services. And also we have a problem of inequality.
Yeah, Adam, thanks very much for joining us. You mentioned that the diamond revenues are crashing. So one of the first things that the new president or president-elect Duma Boko announced was that he's going to talk to De Beers about a new deal. Do you think that De Beers, in its present form, owned by Anglo-American, but shortly to be sold by Anglo-American, do you think De Beers is the right partner for Botswana, or Botswana should do something radical? Some people are saying they should just buy De Beers straight, 100% of De Beers from Anglo-American, or they should find another company around the world without the historical baggage of De Beers and go their own way.
My position is that we have been with De Beers for more than 5 decades, and it is an international company that has worked relatively well. It has contributed to our socio-economic and political development in this country, is well entrenched, and it is incumbent upon Advocate Duma Boko and his team to renegotiate the terms of the relationship between the Botswana government and De Beers. De Beers has a lot of experience in the diamond industry. It has expertise, it has professionals, and it has market expertise, and is expanding its wings to other neighboring countries, for example, Angola. So we cannot strategically disengage from De Beers. It's for Duma Boko to establish a team of experienced people, effective negotiators, to objectively, purposively, and with humility, with civility, to discuss with De Beers.
Adam, you mentioned there was a lot of corruption going on, given the sort of centrality of diamond earnings. Are you confident that Duma Boko has got what it takes to stop that corruption? I hear that a lot of diamonds are finding their way to Dubai, for example, and other infractions. Do you think the new government's going to be able to get a grip on corruption?
Corruption in Botswana has become a big problem, an elephant in the room. It has been there since 1966, but with the Masisi administration, started 2019, it has gained momentum. Why? Because the president of Botswana, President Masisi, allowed corruption to go out of hand. He is implicated. When he assumed the office, he promised people to fight corruption. But when, after assumption of office, he became to be part of the problem, partially because he did not disengage from business activities as a president. He participated in business activities. He allowed his family members, his associates, to do business with the government, particularly the sister, who became an entrepreneur after the president assumed the office of the president. And there are numerous corruptive practices that are alleged and proven, of course, that during COVID-19, due to the facilitation by the state of emergency legislation that allowed the president to be the sole determinator of tenders, procurement of public services, then corruption became institutionalized. We have lost a lot of scarce financial resources through these loopholes. And I can hasten to say that
I think we've used your phone to its capacity, Adam. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. Now, Sudan, you can give the war there almost every superlative going. It's now the world's greatest displacement crisis. It's the greatest hunger crisis. It's the greatest humanitarian crisis. So what's being done to stop this immeasurable amount of suffering? A question for the Sudanese political economist, JAWHARA KANU. JAWHARA, thank you very much for joining us. Now, this war's been grinding on for 18 months now. Many attempts at talks, at dialogue have started, but no one has managed to stop the fighting. Why have so many attempts at dialogue failed?
Thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to talk about what's happening in Sudan. As you rightly mentioned, 18 months into the crisis, we don't see much advancement in terms of dialogue, negotiation, or even um, serious international attention that would eventually lead to any solution. At the same time, what we see unfolding every day is a massive humanitarian crisis that's being projected in different fronts. In terms of displacement, in terms of food insecurity, in terms of access to education, health service, and basic needs for the people of Sudan. I think you've asked about the dialogue and a solution not being reached. I think there are different layers to be unpacked here. Of course, solutions can be Sudanese owned and they can be supported internationally. In terms of the Sudanese owned solutions, Sudan's problems haven't started on the night of April 14th. We've had some political stagnation for a few years. We had one of the longest standing dictatorships in Africa. Which was moved forcefully by a peaceful revolution. And then after that, the transitional period was not the easiest, leading to all this political turmoil in the country, making it difficult for the political elite to broker a deal that would bring some peace to the country at the moment. At the same time, internationally, unfortunately, the Sudanese crisis have been not always getting the attention it needs. Depending on what other crisis is taking place in the world, depending on priorities of the countries trying to intervene in the crisis, and depending on the positionalities of the different parties in the war itself. Because even though the war is being fought on the ground between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces, the leading warring parties, there is a huge international alignment of countries behind the two warring parties. Of course, depending on incentives, depending on the power structures, and depending on these countries' long-term plans for Sudan. So it's complicated to look at it if you look at it from the local level, the political kind of arena, and if you even look at it from the international community. Same thing goes for multilateral institutions. Of course, Sudan is part of the IGAD community, the intergovernmental community, which is like our regional bloc in the African Union. We're also part of the African Union, though our membership has been suspended since the coup in 2021. Um, and there is the United Nations. These agencies, of course, interact differently. Some of them have like humanitarian arms. Some of them have um, rather arms that try to broker peace and so on. But so far, even these have been somewhat coupled for different reasons, because these are government entities. At the end of the day, the UN is composed of countries. Same thing goes for the African Union. Same thing goes for the IGAD. So it's not easy to come up with a solution that unifies all these people together.
Jawara, so you've outlined a sort of a panoply of players in the Sudan crisis. Where do the levers of leverage actually lie? Who has the power to do something about it?
I think if I may say, unfortunately, there isn't a magical wand or a magical solution that can fix the issue of Sudan at the moment. It can be all these different layers, because I for one, am a believer that whatever solution would have to be generated by the Sudanese broader society, represented by its political parties, by the civil society, by the different forms of representation that are there. That has to be in place. A proper political process has to be in place. And there is also an international role to be played for protecting civilians, for making sure that humanitarian aid is being channeled through, and all these kind of things. And for the regional players to align their incentives or their priorities same as the people of Sudan. So unfortunately, I don't have a simple answer. I wish I had a particular lever where we would just work with, but I think it would just have to be multi-sectarian, multi-layered.
Jawhara, do you feel that the African countries, other African countries, particularly the neighboring countries, but other African countries, Nigeria, etc., do you feel they're sufficiently interested in the crisis that the Sudan is going through at the moment?
The direct answer would be no. Immediate neighbors of Sudan, yes, they're interested for different reasons, because they're positively and negatively affected, more negatively with the conflict in Sudan. So going back to the issue of displacement, for example, more than 300 million people have crossed the borders from Sudan to its neighboring countries. So this automatically puts Egypt, Chad, Libya, Ethiopia, South Sudan at a huge vulnerability of receiving big amounts of refugees.
Jawhara, I'm not talking about people who are negatively affected and therefore interested because for self-interested reasons. Because obviously, if you've got a whole bunch of refugees and displaced people on your doorstep, you're going to be concerned. I'm talking about genuine concern on a humanitarian level.
As I said, the direct answer would be no. The direct answer would be no, especially from countries that don't share borders with Sudan.
And so, do you find that maybe there's very little interest internationally in Europe or the States or whatever? Do you feel that there's more interest internationally than regionally or continentally? Or it
I
doesn't
think
matter?
there is more interest. There is more interest regionally and internationally, but it's not necessarily for the humanitarian reasons, as you mentioned earlier before. There is interest because these different countries, these different groups, have alignments that require them to intervene at the moment in a certain way. So, for example, different countries in the Arab states, or different countries in the West, or even in Europe, they have interest. Like Europe, for example, is having interest in controlling migration. So they might have an interest in intervening in this crisis, not because there is a humanitarian crisis and this should be a priority. So it would depend on which actor, but there are different interests being played out.
Yeah, Jawhara, thanks for this. You mentioned some sort of intervention to get humanitarian, medical, and food aid to people. And there was a big international debate after all these UN reports talking about the depth of the crisis. 15 million people at risk of serious food shortages, maybe 1 million people dying of famine. This would be happening in front of everyone's eyes with all our knowledge, and yet it's still happening in 2024. And 3 decades after the genocide in Rwanda, yet the UN Security Council met last week and couldn't agree on any intervention to deal with this. What's your take on this, and what can be done to get the right sort of intervention to save lives, but not to complicate the political process? How do you see the way up?
I think the right way to put it is for people to put this humanitarian angle at the front line ahead of everything else. So, for example, we're still having a debate of who should be representing what at talks, but the humanitarian aspect is not being prioritized in the same way. That's the first element of it. The second element would be the resources needed for this humanitarian action. It's not little, but it also, whatever that's being committed to is not being provided. For example, we have had different international gatherings where international players, be it countries or even organizations, pledging to pay certain amounts of money for the ongoing crisis, even at earlier stages, but that amounts of money haven't been fully deployed yet. I remember some of the statistics from August this year that only 37% of what's being pledged is actually being paid out by the different donor countries or by the different organizations and so on. So there is the issue of financing. There is also the issue of access, because at the end of the day, for this humanitarian support to access the people inside the country in a war situation, there has to be ways how it's being delivered, be it material kind of humanitarian support. And that's not very easy because we're having areas whereby the two forces are having different control areas. So it's not easy to have a unified way of channeling down aid from one place, like from the port city to inside the country. So there is a lot of negotiation that has to happen there. And unfortunately, this negotiation is highly political. So even if you try and disjoint the humanitarian from the political, you would end up there. And same thing goes for the other borders of the country from neighboring countries. There is lots of political negotiations happening. The third thing, which is also important, is that in theory, Sudan has lots of resources. For years, the people of Sudan have depended on agriculture, on their own crops, and so on. And this hasn't been very easy for people to sustain this year. And even the year before. First of all, of course, lack of security. People are not able to access their farms. They're not able to access production inputs. And when they do, they're not able to harvest safely. Hence, there is this issue of the fact that even the resources that are available within the country, people are not able to fully utilize them. Some parts of the country have successfully managed to harvest, but it remains an issue that how can you access markets and how can you exchange goods from one place to another. So even if you try and say, okay, let's prioritize the humanitarian crisis, you cannot take it out of the other dynamics that are taking place in reality.
And what I find particularly depressing about this is that both sides, well, it started, didn't it, with a war between two generals, but it's now expanded to include a whole variety of armed groups and even vigilantes, those people taking up arms in order to protect themselves and their communities. So it's now countrywide and involving so many different axes of conflict.
That's true. That's absolutely true. Because, as I said, it didn't just start in the 15th of April. Before that, Sudan had different armed movements that were either in agreement with the government through certain peace agreements, or some of them were not even in agreement with the government at the time. But what that tells you is that there's always been a tendency for certain parts to be armed within the existing kind of structure of the state. This is, of course, a legacy that has been passed down since the war in the south, since the war in Darfur, and since the previous government have been arming different tribal groups um, uh, to serve the government purposes in certain areas. So there's always been this tendency for groups to be armed either by the state or by their own resources. There is that element. And now there's the basic need for one to protect themselves. I mean, when we see the attacks that are being raged on the villages, the atrocities, the rapes and everything, it's only natural for humans to want to protect themselves, even though it's very imbalanced kind of battle, whereby um, the troops would be highly equipped, they would be highly trained, and the citizens, they're having their simple arms trying to defend themselves and so on. But you're right, it's now not just the RSF and the Sudanese armed forces. There are different streams, be it like new armed movements being trained in Sudan and outside of Sudan, be it older armed movements positioning themselves as one of the warring parties, or be it regular citizens finding an opportunity in a blooming arms market, buying guns, buying equipments to protect themselves, and then taking it upon themselves, which is even jeopardizing them further.
So, Jawhara, is there any hope? If you could choose one thing that would move things forward out of this crisis zone, what would you suggest?
I would say it should be the focus on the protection of civilians and the focus on the humanitarian aspects, because despite it being very complicated at the moment, it's the most pressing need, number one, and it's the area where there can be some consensus made to some extent.
I mean, I've heard people argue the case for safe havens of the sort that we saw in the Yugoslav civil war in the 1990s, where, you know, everyone understands how fierce the fighting is and how determined the two sides are. But if the international system set up some sort of safe havens for civilians to gather, to collect food and medical supplies, might that be some sort of help?
That's definitely one of the solutions that people have been debating over the past few days, highly rather. Some people look at it as a solution. Some people look at it as an issue that would it depends on what side, of course, you're supporting, but some people look at it as an issue that's going to highly affect the sovereignty of the state represented by the army and so on. However, I think what's important is that yes, there is an experiment there. There is experiences there where people can learn from, but there is also the Sudanese legacy, and it's important for people to focus on that. Since the beginning of the war, for example, Darfur region has 5 states. 4 of these 5 states have managed to broker local peace deals between the warring parties in the areas. It's true that some of them didn't hold for long. It's true that there were different contexts at play at the time, but this tells you that the community itself is able to generate ideas. So my take would be, if we are going to adapt this solution of safe havens, green zones, localized ceasefires, whatever is the term that we're using, it shouldn't be a solution that's blueprinted by the international community and implemented on the ground. It has to borrow from the legacies even within the current war, and even from the initial incidences that have been taking place across the country. And this is just an example. There have been smaller villages that have been doing this. There have been towns. There have been areas where people have been negotiating travel routes. So I think this is what needs to be included. Of course, it's hard work because, number one, Sudan is a very big country. You can't have one solution that can be replicated in different areas. But I think at least since it's owned by the community would be working harder to at least sustain it for a longer period. So this is how I see it.
JAWHARA KANU, thank you very much indeed. It's not a very pretty picture that you're painting, but you've illuminated some of the grave issues for us. So JAWHARA, thank you so much indeed.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Okay, now, Donu, why don't you tell us what Nigerians are making of KEMI BADENOCH?
Well, it's actually quite seismic, very seismic, for a black woman of any nationality or origins to become leader of the British Conservative Party. So it's a really, really big deal, particularly since the so-called party of the sort of like left-wing liberal, lovely, wonderful, non-hypocritical people have never managed to choose either a woman or a person of color to head them. So far, the Conservatives have had 3 or 4 women, and now they've had a brown man in Rishi Sunak, and now they've got a black woman. So I'm not saying they're great, but I'm just saying that in itself is very interesting, because they are supposed to be the party of bigotry, racism, sexism, you know? Okay.
Absolutely. But the problem is, in many ways, I'm rather inclined to disregard her colour, as significant as it might seem, and in fact her gender, and just think that they've got someone to do their dirty work for them, and score points for the other side.
Well, you could look at it that way, but, you know, Kemi's not my favourite person. And I must say that what has struck me, another very interesting fact, is that despite this massive achievement, you know, however you may see it or regard it as being motivated, Nigerians are not really responding they're barely responding. Never mind enthusiastically. I mean, I'm in London at the moment, and you'd think there'd be a lot of enthusiasm or even opposition to her triumph. But people are really lethargic. They're much more interested in what's happening with Kamala Harris, the other black woman, on the other side of the Atlantic. So it's so weird. Here we are in London. No one seems to care. What?
She should have joined the Republican Party, Donu, instead of the Tory Party. Then everyone would have been absolutely transfixed. KEMI BADENOCH versus Kamala Harris. It would have been the election of the century.
Well, you know, it's bizarre. I mean, Nigerians love success. No matter where it comes from, no matter how it is closed or, you know, presented. I'm flabbergasted. I don't understand it. I mean, a few people back home have said, oh, well done. But none of the Nigerian platforms I belong to, the WhatsApp groups and things, nobody's celebrating, nobody's commenting, apart from there's one bitter left-wing woman called Dr. Shola, who is not happy about her her victory. And she's pretty much the only one who's saying anything.
Oh, there was a tweet or whatever you call it on X from Peter Obi in which he was extolling the virtues of Nigerian success, but not KEMI BADENOCH in particular, I think.
Yeah, well, Peter has done the right thing. I mean, I should think that even though they say she has thrown Nigeria under a bus by being highly critical of Nigeria in recent months, at one point she even said that she fled Nigeria to come to Britain, and which people even question that narrative, but let's leave that aside for now. The right thing is for the Nigerian authorities to congratulate her. Peter Obi is a major opposition. He's the main opposition politician. I expect the Nigerian government to throw in a few congrats in the near future. It's the right thing to do.
It's going to be a real problem for Keir Starmer, isn't it? I think he's really going to struggle to find a way to respond to her, because
she will make mincemeat of him.
And he can't come on with the sort of Labour cool ethics, we're the face of modern multicultural Britain. All that's out the window now. And as you point out, Labour Party hasn't had a female leader, and hasn't had an ethnic minority leader, anyone remotely in the citadels of power in the Labour Party. So it really does show the Labour Party in incredibly bad light at the moment.
And in fact, the most senior black female in the British Labour Party has been treated very badly. That is Diane Abbott.
Very sharply, by Keir Starmer himself, in fact.
Yeah.
Getting back to KEMI herself, KEMI BADENOCH. So they've appointed her, the Tory party that is, at the moment of its deepest decline in recent times, as they did with Rishi Sunak. So their two brown and black leaders have really inherited a big, big mess. Do you think that she's going to have the charisma or whatever it takes to pull the Conservative Party out of the doldrums?
Well, I mean, she's a sort of bossy, assertive Rottweiler of a nanny type of woman. And she'll probably do a very good job of keeping she'll probably do a very good job of keeping Starmer and co on their toes. And I don't think she's necessarily been brought in to do dirty work or not. The fact is that at the moment, the Conservative Party faithful see her as someone who's got a strong character, who can, fight a good opposition game, And I'm just grateful that she doesn't go around in ankle boots with hair down to her waist like a certain leading Labour female politician I could name. I wish her well. She's not my cup of tea, but I wish her well. She looks serious, seems to be married to a perfectly decent bloke who went to Ampleforth, which is an excellent Catholic school. And I don't know why nobody, including myself, is overjoyed, but I wish her well. I know she said a lot of silly things in the past, but some of what she says is true as well. Life is not just about black, white. There are lots of shades of grey in between. I mean, she has, for example, said that the UK's wealth has never been based on white privilege or colonialism, which is a really stupid thing to say.
All right. Thank you for that, Donu. Now, Patrick, you've been looking back, haven't you? Not in anger, I hope.
No, actually, in celebration. And like you, Martine, I have pretty much no interest at all in boxing generally. I couldn't tell you who's the heavyweight champion. Funnily enough, I met Anthony Joshua, who was one of Nigeria's great hopes, but that was only by accident. But I have to say that take the boxing bit out of it, and the Rumble in the Jungle 50 years ago this week, the boxing match between Muhammad Ali, the greatest of all time, it is, everyone I think can agree on that, versus George Foreman in Kinshasa was just the most incredible event. It wasn't just a boxing match. It was, for the boxing aficionados, an incredible feat, but it was also a socio-political, cultural extravaganza. There was the biggest sporting event in the world in 1974 happening in the capital of Congo, in Kinshasa, under the guidance of Mobutu Sese Seko. So, I mean, you've just got to see it, folks. Just go and see the movie When We Were Kings. And if you're really, I actually read the book called The Fight by Norman Mailer, which takes you through blow by blow the entire training session. He was embedded with Ali's camp and all the rest of it. Takes you through all the drama. But just to give you the basics, yeah. So George Foreman was 24 years old when this fight took place. Probably the fiercest, strongest, biggest, heaviest puncher in the history of boxing, faced Muhammad Ali, who was 32 and regarded as over the hill and a has-been. And they took the fight to Africa. Muhammad Ali had taken himself out of boxing at the height of his career because he wanted to make a protest against the Vietnam War. And he was an anti-Vietnam War campaigner, lost his heavyweight championship and probably tens of millions of dollars in the process, and then eventually came back. And this was his sort of comeback fight. No one gave him a hope in hell. They said that Foreman said he wants to kill someone in the ring and you're going to be it. Ali couldn't give a damn. He ran every time he had a run-in with Foreman. He got the better of Foreman. He told him he was going to whip Foreman's ass in a bar in New York. Then he came to Kinshasa and he said, George Foreman's got a German Shepherd dog. He brought 2 German Shepherd dogs to Kinshasa before the fight. All the Belgian colonialists had German Shepherd dogs. So Ali went around saying that George Foreman is a Belgian. And to be a Belgian colonialist in Congo is about the worst possible insult you could have. So all the kids in Congo said, Foreman's a Belgian. And Ali, Kumbaya, Ali, Kumbaya, and they chanted in favor of kill him. And so he had the people on his side, and he boxed the most incredible match by his rope-a-dope tactics. He allowed Foreman to punch himself out for 8 rounds, came back and knocked Foreman literally cold, at least for the, was it 10 seconds?
I must say I'm so not interested in the blow-by-blow account of the boxing, Patrick. Excuse me, but I am really interested in the fact that it had a huge impact, didn't it, on the American civil rights movement as well as the African liberation movement. As you say, Zaire was 10, 12 years just out of colonial rule from the Belgians, and everybody on the continent was trying to shake off the vestiges of colonial rule, weren't they? And so it gave a huge impetus, didn't it, to sort of black power and black rights, if you like, the world over.
I just wonder why so many black men have to sort of dedicate their lives to beating each other up. And it actually causes brain damage. So, boxing, not very impressed. Why can't they play tennis?
Because it's a way out of poverty, unfortunately, isn't it? And that ends this edition of Africa Here and Now. Please remember to subscribe and share with your friends and your colleagues. You can follow us on the socials, Instagram, Facebook. You can follow me on LinkedIn and on X. Do get in touch. We are on all the major audio platforms as well. There's our website, www.africahereandnow.com. There you can catch up with all our past editions. And our producer is Anne Busby. Our original music is by Emmerich Adam, Moses Abuye and Charlie Panton put it all together. Our thanks to our guests, Adam MFUNDISI and JAWHARA KANU. From Patrick, Donu and me, thank you for your company.